prestige is probably a little bit overblown, right? There are a lot of great, for example, regional public colleges and universities out there that are real workhorses in higher education that offer excellent completion rates at an affordable price.
Everyone, welcome back to Office Hours. I'm Will Geiger, co-founder of Scholarships 360, and I'm really excited about today's guest, Bill DeBaun. Bill is a senior director at the National College Attainment Network, and I'm excited to sit down with you, Bill. Welcome.
Will, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And hi, everyone out there in podcast land.
Yeah, so Bill, we like to start these conversations off with a little bit of myth busting. I'm curious from your vantage point, what you think the biggest myth or misconception that students or families have about higher education these days.
I think there's a few. One, right, is the idea that college is monolithic today, right, and that the kind of the 4-year residential experience is like what encapsulates college, right? I think more broadly, the way that students and families are thinking about the more broadly the way that students and families should be thinking about kind of college and what happens after high school is kind of broadly education and training after high school, right? We know that the high school diploma like should not be terminal for students if at all possible in today's economy, right? And there are a lot of different kinds of quote unquote post-secondary pathways. Now, all else being equal, where students have the aspiration and the ability, the aptitude to pursue a 4-year degree, they should be supported to do that, right? I mean, if you have aspirations to pursue that pathway, our systems and our professionals should be set up to encourage that pathway. But if your kind of career preference, ambition, and aspiration, right, is in more of a short-term credential or a 2-year degree, like that, we should be inclusive of that as well. Just while really being clear that like the high school diploma is not enough today, right? In the year 2025. I think the other piece is really not limiting like who college is for, right? In the same way that we should be inclusive about the kinds of post-secondary pathways we're informing students and families about, we should also be inclusive about who we are supporting toward a post-secondary pathway, right? And so that should start earlier in the K-12 experience, frankly, right? To build kind of a college-going identity, to build kind of the building blocks about financial aid and what kinds of pathways there are, to do some career exploration, right? We shouldn't be leaving that until later on in high school. We should be building that college-going vision much earlier on so that as high school graduates prepare to make that transition, they feel like, they've got the information they need to make a successful choice.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely just like such a big investment of time and money. And it always, like, when I was on the school counseling side, struck me as just wild that students were expected, if you wait until your regular decisions come in the late spring, you have like 30 days to make a decision, to compare financial aid offers, to make a very complicated financial investment, as to your point, to select a major. I think these are all like, really, really, really big questions. And unfortunately, just a lot of students, like due to, the student to counselor ratio in schools across the country, are not like, necessarily well supported in the process of making those decisions. So
Yeah, I mean, our systems
definitely.
really are just not set up in general, right? I'm painting with a broad brush here, but in general, I don't think our systems are designed to systematically deliver those kinds of supports, right? And like my soapbox about this is that we generally in education have an understanding that English language arts, mathematics, for example, the skills that you learned in those disciplines, they scaffold over time, right? And you use the knowledge that you got in one grade to learn new things in the next. I think college and career readiness competencies, knowledge, like experiences, they scaffold the same way, but we don't really treat it that way. And, or at least most places are not. And consequently, right, I think that students are not getting the high quality post-secondary advising that they would really benefit from.
Yeah, I think one area where this, I think, becomes even, more apparent is considering all these different types of pathways. I think that's great. There's also a lot of data associated with all these pathways, and I think there's just that's a lot to process. Like
Mhm,
if you're just a student or family as a consumer of this product.
mhm.
So I'm kind of curious. I know you do a lot of research, a lot of work with data. What metrics do you think matter the most when selecting a college, or I guess just a post secondary like option more broadly? But
Yeah, I mean, if I could just pick one, I guess it would be completion rate, right? I want to know how likely am I to get a return on this significant investment that I'm making. I am a firm believer that it is hard to know what something is worth without knowing what it costs. So, looking at net price, for example, is extremely valuable. I think there's pieces in here about time to degree, right? We think about 4-year college or 2-year college as those windows. There's a reason that federal data sets measure completion in 150% of the time, right? Because we know that for a lot of students, that those 2 years and 4 years are more of a suggestion. Certainly, we would like for students to finish degrees in those windows. Life happens, right? And so I'm cognizant of that too. Um, I think there's also a piece here that, we're getting better and better data about kind of earnings after completion, right? Or after, attending a post secondary institution. I think that's also very valuable and factors into the return on investment questions.
yeah, no, I think that's thinking about the time horizon is so key, and just to reiterate that the 150%, that would be like, a 6-year period of time for a 4-year degree.
Hmm.
That's just important because you need to be thinking about, maybe for average student budgeting beyond 4 years, it's going to take a little bit longer. This, happens for a variety of reasons. Like sometimes students transfer, sometimes credits don't transfer over,
Hmm.
sometimes you switch major. A number of things can happen, and it's, you know, smart to budget for a little bit of a longer time period. And then on the completion rate stat, I mean that's something again just to see which institutions are doing a better job of graduating students in that 4-year 6-year period of time. And unfortunately with the way higher education is set up right now, you're pursuing a 4-year degree. You leave after like 2 years. You're not walking away in most cases with a credential. Though I know that is changing, and there's a little bit of a movement for awarding associate's degrees to students after 2 years. That's probably not going to be the norm. Um, and then yeah, just one practical tip on the when thinking about net price. I know schools will report that, but the best thing for students to do is to fill out the net price calculator.
Hmm.
Schools are interested in. I know we also had on the show Phil Levine, who created My Intuition,
Yep.
which is also a great tool. It's a little bit more simple. Not going to be necessarily as specific as net price calculator because it is more simple, but we'll give you a great idea of what a school might cost for your family. Doing that earlier in the process is always best. Like if you're, it's right now the fall. If you're a senior, that's amazing to be doing that now. But it's also not too early. If you're a junior or a sophomore, like not a bad idea just to sort of get a sense of what schools might look like financially for you and your family.
I think there's a lot of I think there's a lot of value just in kind of, and I know this should has talked about net price before. Like I think there's just a lot of value in like hammering the concept of net price, right? Like do not be looking at your prices of institutions, right, as if that is what the average student is going to pay. I mean the analogy, right, is the car shopping piece. Like the price in the window is not what you often pay, and I think it's just a really, I think it's always just a very valuable concept to communicate to students and families as often as possible, right? That everyone is not paying the same price for a given institution. That price varies according to your income. There are things like net price calculators that you can kind of get this estimate. And the college scorecard has net price in 5 different income bands uh, for every institution in the country. So
Yeah, no, that's great. Like just kind of a quick and dirty way of just sort of getting a sense of like ballpark, like what this could look like. And I think to your point, it's just a reminder that at so many schools, even, students who maybe you don't think you qualify for financial aid, don't make that assumption. Like you should definitely, look at the data, just because you see in the, news, that, so and so college is $100,000 a year, like that is not going to be the case, like with the exception of like very specific percent of high earners. Like most students are going to qualify for
Mhm.
financial aid. I know a lot of highly selective schools have come out with different promise programs. Recently where students who might qualify, might for like make family income over under 150K, like essentially you'll go for free. So those are other programs just to be aware of. But completely agree, Bill. Just this sticker price is not net price. And it's adds a lot of complexity when trying to figure out what college costs. But there are some tools to give you some insights that will give you a little bit of a better idea of like what that price might look like for you and your family.
I always like to stress, don't let that big sticker price number stress you out, right? Let's interrogate it a little bit more and try to get closer to what is a fair approximation for what it would cost.
No, I think that's a really great takeaway for students. And a great, yeah, something, yeah, that we want to constantly be reminding them of. I'm also curious, is there any like data points that you think matter less that are perhaps a bit overhyped that families and students are very fixated on, but like actually, should not be a big part of their kind of college purchasing decision?
I mean, to some extent, I think prestige, right, is probably a little bit overblown, right? Looking at things like college rankings, unless they're specifically around economic mobility or or closing kind of like intergenerational gaps in attainment. Kind of the standard rankings that we see, I give a lot less credence to. They tend to be, pretty correlated um, with kind of just historical prestige. There are a lot of great, for example, regional public colleges and universities out there that are real workhorses in higher education that offer excellent completion rates at an affordable price. And so, I kind of I give I put less stock in the prestige column. I think also things like, I mean, and these are a little bit maybe like stereotypical at this point, but like being a fan of the university or like being a fan of their like athletics teams, like you can be a fan, you
Mhm.
can continue to be a fan even if you go somewhere else. I promise, right? Like that is not a particularly good reason to pursue an education uh, somewhere, especially given kind of the importance of that for your your life down the line.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a ton of sense, and yeah, I would particularly agree on some of the prestige or like something like acceptance rate, where I think like a lot of times that is this like indicator of value, and I think with acceptance rate in particular, it can just be like very we've seen how it can be very engineered by institutions. Even rankings like they can change quite a bit, and are not necessarily they're not a ranking for you and your family situation and the major you're interested in and the
Hmm.
goals. They are kind of very like broad, and like maybe generally there's some value in that, but would encourage you to always go like deeper and sort of like think about your goals, your financial situation, um and ultimately like what you want to get out of your college education.
I mean, I think ultimately, and we're going to talk about this coming up, I think, but it's like to go back to the metrics that we think matter, right? If it's about kind of that intersection of can I afford it and will I complete from here and will I be gainfully employed following it? There are way more institutions in this country beyond the top 25 or the top 50 that have kind of like household name recognition that will deliver on all three of those metrics, right? And we because the decision making here, as you point out, is complex and frankly a little bit daunting for students and families,
Mhm.
right? We get into these heuristics, these like kind of like shorthands for decision making, and like prestige is like taking the place of like actually looking at some of these measures that really are what we should be selecting for in post-secondary institutions.
Yeah, you have to do it's I wish there was like just the rankings like would dictate that would be really nice and easy decision making, but do have to do a little bit of work, a little bit of like thinking and a little bit of research. I know you called out college scorecard. We'll definitely include a link to that in the show notes. Are there other kind of go-to sources of information that you recommend that folks look at or that you're looking at for some of your other work?
So one is more for kind of students and families, right? And then one is more for the practitioners who are advising them. I mean, I guess I would just say that like a lot of states now have what they call SLDS systems. These are statewide longitudinal data systems, and they are almost like state-specific versions of the college scorecard. But because they also have data from in-state institutions, you can get in some states kind of information about uh, post-secondary enrollment outcomes by institution, including with high school kind of like pipeline data, right? And so the college scorecard is a really valuable national tool. It does necessarily like lack some granularity, right? And so when you look at specific statewide systems, if your state has one, I think it fills in some of that kind of like nitty gritty about who is completing from these institutions, in what time to degree, like what do transfer patterns look like, where are students from a given high school going, right? Like those are additional questions that you won't necessarily get looking at the Department of Education's college scorecard.
I love that, and I think it's a great reminder that so much of higher ed is, like, fairly local, and, like, that local that they're didn't really realize there was these additional resources. Yeah, can include a link to a couple of these afterwards just so, folks can have some ideas of, yeah, different resources to explore.
And then for practitioners, there's a platform from the National Student Clearinghouse called Student Tracker, and districts and high schools can subscribe to Student Tracker and send data from previous high school graduating classes, and then it will match kind of what those students' post-secondary enrollment outcomes were. I think this is a really useful tool for the people advising our students and families because it lets you answer like, here's where students from this high school went and how they did when they got there, and I think that's a powerful advising tool for a few different reasons. One, it controls for like some student and community level factors that have some impact on post secondary outcomes. But also, just like if you're a student and you're considering where to go, I think it does help to know like specifically students from my high school have done well or have struggled or have stopped out like at X period going to these institutions. This is all in service to the idea of we should be helping students find the place that's going to help them complete. And to the extent that we can provide that additional context about like previous post secondary pipelines, that is something we should be providing more.
Yeah, no, that's that seems incredibly valuable. I know when I was a counselor, we had Naviance. This sounds just like Naviance on steroids, where it's just a lot more information, deeper data on like what the experience actually looked like once the students were on campus. So that's great.
Mhm.
Um, to change gears a little bit, I know one of the big topics and among enrollment professionals and missions folks is the enrollment cliff. I'm particularly curious, like, what do you think this means for students and families as buyers of education in the next few years?
Well, in the next few years, I'm not sure, right? In the long run, I think that institutions will be competing for a smaller pool of kind of traditional age students coming directly from high school. Potentially, that could give students and families some more leverage in terms of being honest about like what kind of financial aid award they would need to be able to matriculate to a given institution. Um, you know, I will say that the reason I have pause about the next couple of years is that the kind of the joke that I've made is if I ever get pushed off of a cliff, I kind of hope it looks like the graph of the enrollment cliff, right? Because it is a pretty gradual decline, right? It's not like
Mhm.
you're stepping off the cliff and, and falling down like a like it's Bugs Bunny. It is kind of a gradual decline. I think what remains to be seen here in terms of students and families' leverage and experience is how whether, and how well institutions pivot their own practice and enrollment management strategies. We have something like 37 million people in this country that are some credential or some college no credential, and that is a population that is, potentially ripe for bringing back onto college campuses and helping them complete. So it is true that our high school graduating classes are going to get smaller, and so that is going to put some pressure on enrollment managers who are strictly looking at kind of that direct to high school pipeline. But there are substitutes available for making classes. And, it really does remain to be seen whether or not and which institutions will be able to make that pivot.
Yeah, no, that's I think that's a good reminder for the kind of visual. I like that visual of the enrollment cliff where it is more of a gradual decline, and just the big question mark being like how will colleges respond. I think sometimes they're colleges can be slower moving organizations, so not necessarily going to just completely change the way they behave in a very short period of time. Maybe some schools will. um I guess we'll see.
Can I add one more piece about that, just in
Mhm.
terms of how it could affect the student and family experience? Is, I talked a little bit about like the leverage piece, but I think it also could potentially have impacts on the kinds of outreach that students and families are seeing and which students are seeing that outreach. Um, if we get to a place where the quote unquote low hanging fruit has been picked, colleges and universities will have to expand the audience to which they're doing outreach. We still have really significant gaps in post secondary enrollment in this country based on high school income, high school demographics, and there are lots of students in those high schools who can succeed on post secondary pathways given the opportunity, right? And given the outreach from institutions. And so, to the extent that um, institutions are not making their classes with the geographic footprint or the pipeline that they previously had, they really should be considering which high schools, which districts, which student groups have been under recruited, right, for their campuses. They can be really positive engines of economic and educational opportunity in this country. Uh, we might have to see kind of climbing higher up into the branches to get some of that higher hanging fruit, though.
Yeah, I mean, one kind of to piggyback off of that, one area where I'm seeing in conversations with enrollment deans and leaders is 2-year college students and community college students. Seems like a lot of schools who traditionally did not rely on community college students are really trying to think about how strategizing around building partnerships with community colleges in their region, and just like this being another source of students. I think this is awesome. Just it's adds a lot of diversity, adds a lot of different experiences to some of these like more traditional institution student bodies. But is yeah, definitely I think the transfer will be I think another like big marketplace where colleges are just going to have to turn just because they're need to be creative and need to be digging a little bit deeper.
Well, it shores up the pipeline a little bit too. I mean, when we look at the prevalence of dual enrollment now nationally,
Mm.
the percentage of schools who are offering and students who are receiving some kind of dual enrollment opportunity is massive. I mean, it's eye-popping how much that has grown, and a lot of those experiences are being delivered on community college campuses, right? So there's that part of the pipeline is that certainly gotten shored up on K-12 to community college. But when we're living in an age where students and families report affordability as a major concern, right, and being kind of debt averse, the idea of starting at a community college and then pursuing kind of like a 2+2 model, like making that community college to 4-year pivot, is quite appealing. It's up to institutions and to policymakers, frankly, to make sure that that 2+2 kind of model is viable, right? That we're not burying students in red tape in doing that, that the credits that students have in the community college are transferring, and that becomes a really viable pathway to educational attainment. If we're talking about to come back to the enrollment cliff or the enrollment bunny hill, as I kind of like jokingly call it, um, if the number of students that we have is like if that pool is shrinking, then yeah, to your point, the students who are in community colleges now become a much more appealing source of making your class if you're an institution.
Yeah, and just as a reminder to put even finer point on that, could mean more scholarships, just like financial incentives, essentially to attract more of these students, as the marketplace just becomes more competitive. Um, I guess to one other, you brought up the issue of student loan debt, Bill. That's like a question we always get, and I'm kind of curious what your take is on, what's a reasonable amount of debt for a student to take out for, let's be very specific, for a 4-year college education.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of heuristics, right? The idea, right? I've heard kind of the idea that your total loan debt should not exceed kind of your first year salary, right? I've heard that as kind of a general rule of thumb. Um, I think this is it's really difficult. It's really family dependent, and it is really family dependent. I guess I would try to look at some of the federal loan limits as reasonable guidelines, right? To the extent that a student that I was advising uh, needed to go past kind of the federal loan limits and start looking at either like Parent Plus or to look at private loans, that would give me pause and would kind of spark a new conversation, really looking at the institutional choice, right? Is there a particularly good reason that we think this institution and how you see yourself at it in terms of major and like career pathway, right, are justify taking on kind of like additional outsized amounts of loan debt. Um, I think it's highly contextual, but that's really where I would probably start with students that I was advising.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good call out. Just the distinction between you know, the Parent Plus loans and other student loans. Just that you should not think about those as the same. Um, Another area, I know that has been a hot topic, is around Pell Grants. And just like this notion that costs are outpacing funding through programs like Pell. Can you elaborate a little bit on this? To kind of how we got here and where you see this going?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's reasonable just to remember, right, that when we think about paying for college, there's like a costs piece and there's a credits piece, and the credits piece is a matter of federal, state, and institutional policy about where we choose to place dollars to help students finance something that we think is valuable not just for the students themselves, but as a broader public good, right? We think that educational attainment is good for the broader public, for society, for all kinds of reasons, right? Additional tax revenues, better health outcomes, economic needs, right? Like there's all kinds of reasons. And so There's obviously a lot of attention, especially in the media, around the cost of college. I think there's relatively less around the public policy choices that help to defray those costs. And so, specifically looking at the Pell Grant, the Pell is the cornerstone of kind of federal financial aid. It is a well-targeted program at students from low-income backgrounds, and um, you know, at its inception, the Pell Grant covered something like 70-80% of tuition and room and board at a four-year public institution. And now, today, the purchasing power of Pell has declined, right? And that has really inverted. That's put a lot more pressure on students and families. The Pell Grant is still an incredibly important piece of public policy, and it has made college possible for millions of students across the country. But programs like the Pell and state level investments in need based financial aid, right, are real engines of economic opportunity. Again, to use that phrase, um, we know we college costs actually have dipped slightly in the past couple of years. College Board has pretty interesting data looking at that trend. But just because college costs in the past couple of years have kind of stalled out or declined a little bit, still doesn't mean that for the typical family at any income level that a 4-year uh degree, for example, is absolutely affordable, right? Like cost might have declined relatively, but have we gotten to like absolute affordability? We have not, right? And so um, we think a lot about going to college as an individual choice, right, for students and families. But I do think it's important that we remember that our policymakers and the decisions that they make have a real impact on ultimately students' ability to matriculate to a post-secondary education.
Yeah, no, yeah, appreciate that overview. And yeah, really, yeah, interesting just to see how, that, yeah, didn't quite realize it was that high of percent of both like the tuition and the room and board, the total cost that a Pell once covered. That is, yeah, pretty striking. Um, I guess as we bring this back, to the students and families who might be listening, from kind of your seat, what do you think like one actionable thing, students can do in the next week, if you're a senior to, kind of get ahead, in your admissions and financial aid process?
Well, I would be remiss, given all the work that we do on the FAFSA at NCAN, not to say go out and complete your FAFSA. If you're a senior, right, go to FAFSA.gov, create an account, right, send the information you need to the contributors in your family who will be contributing to your FAFSA. Go ahead and get that done. Just have one less thing to worry about in the college going process. But whether you're a senior or not, uh, I really would take a spin through the U.S. Department of Education's college scorecard. It is a very valuable tool. Just pick any institution, pick an institution in your backyard, right, and just go through and look at the different metrics that are available there. I would call out again things like college completion, looking at outcome measures both overall and for Pell Grant recipients, right. I would be looking at net price by income level and just kind of get some familiarity with. I understand it's jargon, it sounds very technical, but just get some familiarity with what these things represent, right? The concept that are you going to get through? Will you get paid at the end of it? Can you afford to go there in the first place? These are really important concepts to familiarize yourself with. I think the scorecard delivers on them quite effectively. And, way too often when I'm advising students, I ask if they've been making their college lists, like using the scorecard's parameters. They have all these ideas about where they would like to go, how much they would like to pay, what kinds of programs they would like to pursue. And there are all these really great filters, right? And using them, you can turn up some of these institutions that maybe weren't on your college list, but should be because they are delivering on the things that you yourself have said are important to you through the filters.
Yeah, that is, I think, great advice, and I appreciate just in this conversation, everyone out there. You might not, be a a data, whiz and professional like Bill, but you have some, I think a little bit of a roadmap for, thinking about some of these like really, really great tools that are providing, families and students with, accurate, update information that you can also compare apples to apples, just as every school that receives federal funding is going to have a college scorecard profile. That is incredibly helpful. I know that's like when I was on the school counseling side, always like wanted to pull my hair out when, trying to navigate different institutions' websites. Every website's a little bit different. Information can be presented a little bit differently. So I think that's a real perk of the college scorecard. Yeah, thank you so much, Bill, for joining us. This has been really great. I really think the students and families out there are going to get a lot out of this episode. Definitely, we have a number of things to link to, as well as link to NCAN. I know you're creating great research and continuing to advocate for college attainment in the U.S. So thank you.
Will, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, have a great day.
You too.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to another episode of Office Hours with Will Geiger. If you're a student or parent, don't forget to check out app.scholarships360.org, where you can sign up for our free scholarship matching platform. For colleges, we've got solutions to make your work easier, which you can check out at connect.scholarships360.org. And one last thing, if you or someone you know would make a great guest on the show, I'd love to hear from you. You can always reach me by email or on LinkedIn. Until next time, thanks again for listening.